Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to reconstruct the exact, volatile moment a clandestine cell of junior military officers completely dismantled a 150-year-old dynasty, literally overnight. This isn't just some dusty sequence of dates. We're stepping right into a living, breathing moment of extreme uncertainty, where every single decision carried real, life or death consequences, and ultimately, fundamentally altered the modern world. So how did they actually do it? How did a monarchy that had ruled since 1805 collapse so spectacularly? We're going to step into the suffocating, uncertain atmosphere of 1950s Cairo to figure that out. What hidden forces made this takeover possible? And what democratic alternatives were ruthlessly crushed in the aftermath? Well, to understand the explosion, let's step back and look at the root causes. Part 1. A century of rot. You see, to truly understand the explosion, you have to examine the powder keg first. For decades, Egypt had been decaying from the inside out, trapped under this veiled British protectorate. And the inequality, it was staggering. By 1952, a massive 42% of all privately held agricultural land was controlled by just the top 1% of landowners. You had this tiny elite of pashas and urban investors locking the entire agricultural heart of the country in a near-feudal grip. The contrast here was just devastating. Picture it, sprawling, luxurious estates of absentee owners, where a microscopic 0.1% of the population held a full fifth of all the arable land. Meanwhile, on the flip side, 95% of smallholders were cramped together onto these tiny, fragmented, inefficient plots, and nearly half the rural population, they owned absolutely nothing at all. For the fellahin, the rural peasantry, this meant a brutal, inescapable life of debt peonage. We're talking about surrendering up to 75% of their crop yields just for rent, scraping by on mere piastries a day. The price of survival was incredibly steep. It was an exploited mass, surrounded by hunger and disease, mirroring the kind of desperation you'd see in French peasants right before 1789. But here's the thing. Systemic poverty alone rarely starts a revolution. Part 2. Humiliation and secret mobilization. Right, so the true catalyst for the coup actually wasn't poverty at all. It was the total psychological shattering of the Egyptian military. During the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, frontline soldiers realized that the royal court was actively profiting from supplying them with defective weapons. Just imagine that profound betrayal. You're taking heavy losses on the battlefield, only to discover your own elites are lining their pockets back home. When King Farouk intervened to falsify the investigations, it completely destroyed any remaining faith in royal justice. And this deep betrayal radicalized an entire generation of non-aristocratic officers. Led by figures like Gamal Abdel Nasser, they formed the Free Officers Movement. This was a highly clandestine network operating in strictly compartmentalized cells just to evade the king's ruthless secret police. This wasn't just a political plot, it was a desperate bid for survival. They wanted to salvage national dignity and purge foreign imperial influence before they themselves were discovered and executed. Part 3. The July 1952 coup. By the summer of 1952, the tension reached an absolute breaking point. What started as a simple dispute over military independence at an officers' club rapidly escalated into a ticking clock for survival. In January, the nationalist officers won the board elections. But by July 16th, King Farouk annulled those elections to force in a royalist general. Knowing their secret network was about to be purged, the Free Officers triggered a sudden, highly coordinated military takeover on the night of July 22nd. Now, the coup was incredibly fast, but it wasn't entirely bloodless. A cornered King Farouk, who actually fancied himself quite the skilled marksman, made a desperate last stand. He literally shot 3 revolutionary guards in the legs before reality finally set in. As Farouk later admitted, it was just difficult to grasp that a handful of junior officers had seized his entire army overnight. He surrendered, was exiled on his royal yacht, and abruptly ended a century and a half of dynastic rule. Part 4. Breaking the landed elite. With the king gone, the new Revolutionary Command Council didn't waste any time. They bypassed elected bodies entirely and unleashed a shockwave that dismantled the old social order overnight. The 1952 agrarian reform ruthlessly capped land ownership at exactly 200 fedans. Vast royal estates were expropriated without a single piastra of compensation. They literally broke the chains of the landed elite and transferred unimaginable wealth straight into state hands. But as we know, history is rarely a clean sweep. While this reform successfully obliterated a century of feudal dominance, it ultimately failed the very poorest. The redistribution favored those who already owned small plots, completely leaving landless casual laborers behind. Plus, mandatory state cooperatives restricted individual liberty, and the resulting fragmentation of the land eventually crippled agricultural productivity, actually paving the way for sprawling urban slums later on. Part 5. The March 1954 Crisis. Okay, so having deposed the king, the true climax of the revolution actually arrived 2 years later, in 1954. It was a brutal, high-stakes battle for the ashes of the old regime. The revolutionaries fractured into two irreconcilable visions. On one side, General Naguib, the older figurehead, desperately pushed for a fragile return to civilian rule and parliamentary elections. Against him stood Nasser, the ruthless architect of the coup, who demanded absolute military governance and a one-party state to force through his socialist modernization. In February 1954, the fate of the nation really hung by a thread. When Nasser's faction forced Naguib to resign, the streets of Cairo absolutely erupted. 100,000 protesters, a volatile mix of students, leftists, and the Muslim Brotherhood, laid siege to Abdin Palace, demanding a democratic Egypt. It was a massive, deafening display of zero-sum politics. The public mobilized, demanding a return to constitutional order. Faced with this massive uprising, Nasser actually feigned compromise, promising elections just to disperse the crowds. But by November, using a failed assassination attempt as its pretext, he unleashed a draconian crackdown. Naguib was locked under house arrest, the very Muslim Brotherhood leaders who had mobilized the protests were sent to the gallows, leftists were terrorized, and universities were placed under permanent surveillance. The democratic windows slammed shut completely as the state absorbed all power. Which leaves us with this final, haunting realization. The 1952 revolution achieved the impossible. It ended British imperialism, shattered feudalism, and ignited national pride. But by crushing those democratic hopes in 1954, did Nasser's Praetorian state inherently lay the groundwork for a half-century of authoritarianism leading all the way to the 2011 Arab Spring? It's a stark reminder that the ruthless mechanics used to seize power often dictate exactly how permanently it will be held.